Hi, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from. It's really good to have you here today in the next of our series of webinars that we're running in partnership with our strategic vendors. For those of you who've signed up, you'll know that today is all about Nutanix Files, so scale-out file services rather, which is powered by Nutanix Files. So the objective today is just to talk you through what this technology is, why it's relevant, and how it's being adopted by customers to replace legacy NAS environments and file services environments in the enterprise. So today we've got with us Steve McElfatrick. I hope I've said your name right. Hello, Steve. Good to have you. Yeah, if you could go to the next slide, let's just do a quick introduction, and then we'll get straight into Steve's bit. So just a word or two on ET Works for those of you who are new to us. I know many on the call have either existing customers or prospects that we've been working with for some time on projects. On the next slide, I've just got just a few key points about ET Works for those of you who don't know us. We are a Nutanix Cloud Champion, one of a handful in the Western Europe region that hold that level of accreditation. So we've got multiple Nutanix certified systems engineers across all of our offices in the UK, South Africa, and Norway, covering the whole EMEA region from a customer geographic footprint. We've led with a number of Nutanix projects across the globe. So the first global Lenovo HX solution deployed. We did the first Nutanix and Haiku solution deployments in Africa. We did the first global 3D VDI rollout in partnership with Citrix, Nutanix, and NVIDIA. We've also got some pretty big Nutanix projects, like a 4,700 seat VDI project in the education sector in Wales. We've got a reference site with Rubrik and Nutanix technology, so showcasing the best of breed in both production environments and production cloud environments and disaster recovery and backup technologies. And we also run our own services, multiple different services such as infrastructure as a service, disaster recovery as a service, backup as a service, and now more recently desktop as a service, all powered by Nutanix and Rubrik technology from our various data centers. On the next slide that Steve's going to go to, we'll just cover off a broader view of our portfolio. This is just to kind of give you an indication of what ET Works does. We're a solutions provider, end-to-end hybrid cloud infrastructure solutions and services is what we specialize in. We've had a specialist division in the business with dedicated technical resources, building this out now since 2014. And as you can tell from this, we cover all aspects of the solution. So the private cloud, public cloud, end user computing, networking and security, data protection, and AI and ML as well. So really a broad end-to-end solution set. On the next slide, Steve's just going to show is the total sort of footprint of Nutanix, ET Works Nutanix customers across the EMEA region, and also of these, and also Rubrik and the other technologies that I've mentioned on the previous slide. So being adopted by household name customers across Europe, Africa, and beyond. So really pleased to see how that's grown in just the last few years. So I think with that, I'm going to wrap up my introduction and hand over to Steve to take us through Nutanix Files. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks very much, Franz. So hi, everyone. My name's Steve McElfatrick. Franz, you were close. So I'm portfolio specialist at Nutanix, covering specifically the storage suite of products. So that's Nutanix Files, Nutanix Objects, and mine backup appliance as well. So we're going to step through Files today. Now, Files we first brought to market in 2017. So of our portfolio products, it's one of the more established ones. And over that time, obviously, we've enhanced, refined, and continued to develop Files. And we've really amassed quite a lot of customers now using Files, and many organizations have switched away from using a sort of a more legacy, traditional file serving approach to take advantage of the modern sort of software defined, very flexible, very easy to manage files sharing solution that Nutanix Files brings. Now, it's not, as I mentioned, the only storage capability that we can deliver from the Nutanix Cloud Platform. We also, as I mentioned, have Nutanix Objects, which is an S3 scale out storage, massively scalable storage capability for object storage with things like versioning and immutability, which is great for backup. So we have that as well. And we even have the ability to provision virtual disks outside the cluster over iSCSI to, for example, bare metal application hosts. So we call that Nutanix volumes. So excuse me. So together with sort of files, objects, and volumes, we've really covered all the bases in terms of a very flexible, from a storage standpoint, multi-protocol capability from the same underlying platform. So all bases covered. We're obviously going to talk about files specifically today, and talk and show as well. I've got a little bit of a demo for you later on. Now files, so what is Nutanix Files? So in essence, it's a software-defined scale-out file server solution. Very, very easy to manage. This is one of its great strengths. Operationally, very simple. All managed from Prism. So anyone on the call who's currently using Nutanix, you'll be familiar with Prism. It's a very simple, to use, well thought out, intuitive interface. There's a lot of automation. So we use the term one click a lot. Lots of automation, and that you'll find a lot of automation within Nutanix Files as well, as we'll see. This is a scale out solution, so hugely scalable. You can start very small and scale out to very big, basically. And we're talking petabyte scale, billions of files, and can concurrently support thousands and thousands of connections. Again, being software defined, you can deploy files almost anywhere. So if you see the graphic at the bottom there, everything from sort of the core data center to remote offices, remote sites, right to the edge. And you can even deploy files now in AWS and before long Azure as well, because we have Nutanix clusters, which basically allows you to spin up a Nutanix cluster in those public cloud environments. And of course, files can run on really any Nutanix cluster. So, it can run anywhere, and that's again speaks to the enormous flexibility. From a feature standpoint, Files has all the features and capabilities that you would hope to see in an enterprise class kind of NAS file server solution. So things like quotas, self-service to store snapshots, Windows previous versions type thing, antivirus, access-based enumeration, all those kind of things. And we also have support for NFS and SMB both. So, to be able to service Windows and Linux file clients. And we can even provide access to the same set of files over both of those protocols simultaneously. So that kind of flexibility can be very useful in a number of scenarios. So from a deployment standpoint, files can be deployed alongside your existing VMs or maybe virtual desktops on the same physical cluster, or it can be deployed in its own sort of standalone dedicated cluster, which is, that would be more the case for very large deployments with, heavy IO requirements, heavy throughput, high capacity. But the choice is yours, and it's flexible in that sense. So we'll just talk a little bit about at a very high level, about the architecture, just so some of the subsequent slides make a little bit more sense. So the file server entity itself, which is represented by the green box here on the slide, this is kind of a single namespace, and it's underpinned by a number of these individual sort of file server VMs, so FSVMs. And in a scale-out deployment, it's a minimum of 3 file server VMs and a maximum of 16. So you can see straight away there that it's very, very scalable. Now, just to be very clear, you do not manage the individual file server VMs. Okay, we take care of that. We manage those behind the scenes. You manage the overall file server entity, which is again the single logical unit, and that's all managed from Prism. And again, we're going to see a little bit of that later on when we dive into the demo. Now, from an operational ease point of view, again, as I mentioned, all done within Prism. It's very, very straightforward, even to deploy a file server from scratch. It's just another module within Prism. So, on the left there, you can see you just fill in some fields, the name of the file server, the domain, IP addresses, size, credentials for updating DNS and adding it into the directory services. And that's it. You do that, and then literally in 20-30 minutes, you will have a fully functioning scale-out file server deployed, ready to serve files. It really is that easy. From an upgrade point of view, again, very simple in true Nutanix fashion. You simply download the binaries directly to the cluster. and then you hit the upgrade button, and it will do a kind of a rolling upgrade across all the file server VMs. It's just it's a heavily automated process. You don't really have to do anything other than hit the button. Very straightforward, very easy. And another example is scaling out. So if you want to increase the size of your file server effectively from a performance or a capacity or both standpoint, then you simply tell it how many file server VMs you want that file server to comprise of, and the increased number, and then you hit the next, and then off it goes, and it'll automatically spin up the new file server VM, add it into the namespace, and again, another heavily automated operation. All this is very straightforward, and we're really trivializing stuff here that with more traditional systems, it can be quite time consuming and tricky to do. Now, this is something that our customers really like. So something called Performance Advisor. So consider when you deploy a file server solution, so you deploy a files instance, and it's been sized for example, a certain number of concurrent connections, and that's great. But let's say over time, you throw more and more at it and add more user sessions, whatever the workload is, more application logging, whatever, to the point where things are going to start to creak. We will actually alert you to that through this Performance Advisor feature. And it will tell you, okay, you've got something that could turn into a problem soon. So let's snip it in the bud early. And it will make one of 3 recommendations to you. And you simply need to accept the recommendation, and then it will automatically implement that recommendation. So another example of automation within files. Now, there are, as I say, 3 types of recommendations. The first one is scale up. So if you accept this recommendation, it will simply hot add additional vCPUs and memory to each of the file server VMs, and thereafter they'll be able to handle, for example, more concurrent sessions per file server VM. So that's one way to go. Another scenario is if maybe things have got a little bit out of whack over time, such that maybe one of the file server VMs within the overall instance is being hammered more than the others. So in that case, what we can do is, Performance Advisor will make a rebalance recommendation. And once you accept that, it will basically move some of the virtual disks between the file server VMs and move some of the user sessions between some of the file server VMs. And everything will be much more balanced as a result. And by the way, the users don't know, which file server VM they're being serviced by. They're abstracted away from all that. They just see a single namespace. So there are no worries on that front at all. And the third type of recommendation that it will make is scale out. So now there is one thing to remember: you can't have more than one file server VM on a physical host for resilience reasons. Obviously, that's within a single namespace. So if you have enough hosts, then it may say, I recommend you scale out, in which case it'll just spin up a new file server VM on another host, and then move some of the disks and sessions across onto that new file server VM, and voila, you're done. So very, very useful stuff. It means that you're never really backed into your corner that you can't get out of, and it will help you all the way with it. So some other features and capabilities, resilience. So bear in mind that Nutanix Files runs on top of the underlying Nutanix sort of cloud platform. And for a long time now, Nutanix has been, had a rock solid and sort of underlying HCI platform with a number of fantastic attributes, all of which are inherited by any service that runs on top of it, such as files. Now, one of those from the resilience side of things is self-healing. So if a disk, for example, fails, then all of the other nodes, physical nodes in the cluster, will contribute to the rebuild process to reconstruct that data that was on that disk. So it happens much more quickly. The recovery completes much more quickly than, for example, a RAID system where it's a single threaded process, just as fast as that individual hot spare can go. So it just, again, very scalable from a resilience standpoint. We call that self-healing. And then we've got smarts as well at the file server layer. So that if a node fails and subsequently you lose a file server VM, We have mechanisms where we can automatically take over the user sessions and move stuff across onto the surviving file server VMs. We just take care of all that. So the resilience is a really strong capability or attribute of Nutanix Files as well. Now, from a security standpoint, you can encrypt as well. So we support self-encrypting disks, of course, but we also have a much more cost-effective software-based encryption capability. And we have a built-in key manager in Prism Central, or you can bring use your own third-party key management. And then from a storage efficiency standpoint and data reduction, we have compression, that's at the files level. And then also something called erasure coding, which particularly can reduce the footprint of data that's has not been accessed in a while, so cold data. So all ways to make much more efficient use of your system. So just a few weeks ago now, we actually introduced our latest release of Files. So we're on 3.8, so we're not far from our 4th generation, interestingly, of Files. And 3.8, I'd say the killer feature of 3.8 was what you see on the slide here, something called Smart DR, and basically represents us really reinventing how we do disaster recovery. So we do replication now on a per share basis at the share level. And what that means is that you can have, a number of different shares protected under maybe a gold policy with, a 10-minute RPO. Then you might have a silver policy that you protect a number of other shares with. It's maybe either an hour RPO or whatever. And there are some shares you may decide not to protect at all. But the point is you have that granular control over what you protect. This, by the way, is just built into the cost of Files. So there's no additional cost for using the DR capability. It's all managed from Prism, as you can see, as consistent with everything else, Nutanix. The RPO, we can deliver low RPOs regardless of how storage dense the nodes are that you're using. So no problem there. You can use large node sizes with impunity. Failover is also nice and slick and quick. So from a recovery time objectives, now what's happening is obviously we have the primary copy, which is obviously read write. That's the live copy. And then that's replicating across to the remote site where there is a passive copy, and that is available online, albeit as a read-only copy that we're updating, every so often, every 10 minutes, for example. Now, the process of failover is really just a question of marking the DR copy as read-writable, and then updating DNS so that users are now being diverted, unbeknownst to them, to the remote copy. The remote site is basically taking on the persona of the primary site's file server. So, again, users don't know that the data is now being served from a different location, and it's all very slick, and we're just redirecting pretty much on the fly. The other benefit actually of having an online available read-only copy at the destination site is the fact that you can use that for other purposes. So for example, if you want to offload backup entirely from your production site, you can back up the read-only DR copy, which is something that's very, very useful in many situations where you want to alleviate as much load as possible from production. There's something else, and this, we're going to spend quite a bit of the rest of the session on this actually. It's a massive differentiator for Nutanix, is file analytics. Now, this is something you just don't get with traditional file server or NAS solutions. It's something you would have to buy an add-on product from a separate vendor altogether, and they generally aren't very cheap. So this is something we just include with the Files license. So this really is a massive value add. What it is providing deep insight into what's going on within your file environment. I mean, a lot of organizations are just kind of more or less blind to the profile of the data, or even these sort of types of activity that's going on within the environment. So this really just sheds light on everything. And we'll get into this shortly, and I'll show you this. We do things like anomaly detection as well, where if there are unusual events or, potentially suspicious events that you would like to know about, we'll detect and flag those to you, and an audit trail, so full accountability of who's done what to what files or directories in your environment. So from a security standpoint, having an audit trail is is extremely useful, and that's what we provide. And just recently, a few weeks ago, we added ransomware protections, so the ability to detect and block ransomware attacks that may be happening, and data age analytics, which is really just tracking the age of the data and sort of in terms of how hot, warm, or cold is your data. So just getting a handle on all that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump over. Oh, of course, it's timed out, into my demo environment and show you some of this stuff. Okay.
I think you're missing an E from the demo there, Steve.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, brilliant. I will correct that shortly. Thank you, Franz.
I've got to do something useful.
Let's see if this works. Hey, we're in. We're in. Okay, so again, for those of you who are using Nutanix already currently, this will be a familiar site. This is Prism, and Files is just another module within Prism. So we just, in our little drop down here, we go down to File Server, and suddenly we can see our Files environment. Now we've got a single file server deployed here. You can see down here, this is comprised of, of 3 file server VMs. Again, you do not manage those, but just interested to know that this is underpinned by 3. So there's the potential there to scale out, for example. And I'm not going to deploy a file server, but I'll just show you, you get an idea of what's involved. So new file server, just give it a name, and then whatever the domain is, and you just put that in there, and the size of your file server. Now you can see that this environment's a little bit resource constrained, so we wouldn't be able to do this because we haven't got enough resources. But quite a nice feature is if you don't know how many file server VMs you need or what size of file server VMs you need, you can simply say, okay, well, look, I know that in this environment, I'm going to have to sort of be able to serve 4,000 concurrent SMB connections at once, and, or whatever amount of throughput. So, what do I need? And it will actually tell you what you need, what configuration you need there and then on the fly. And in this case, we got a couple of alternatives. We can either go a more of a scale out, have more but sort of slightly smaller file server VMs, or go with fewer but chunkier file server VMs. So it does a lot for you. And then it's just a question of stepping through and adding IP address details and then authenticating to the directory, and and that's it. And as I say, 20-30 minutes, lo and behold, you have a file server up and running, ready to go. Here's one I prepared earlier in true Blue Peter fashion. So just super quick, I'm not going to spend long on here, but just to give you a very quick flavor, this is the file server, and you can do all these kind of things. You got all this sort of instant information about usage and performance, and you can look over different sort of time periods, time ranges. You can set up your antivirus integration here, your snapshotting, your Windows previous version type snapshotting, although we provide the same kind of thing for NFS as well. All that good stuff is all done from here. And you see here the update button, you can scale in or out your file server VMs. You can scale them up and down. You can change the capacity. This is really where it shines. It's the versatility, the flexibility, the ability to just adapt it as required as you go along. And that's really an advantage of a software-defined system. Remember also in the slides, we talked about Performance Advisor. So what happens is, you see this, you would obviously get an email, and then you get this sort of recommendation popping up here. And as I mentioned, it's going to be one of 3 things: scale up, rebalance, or scale out. And here it's saying, okay, we recommend that you add another file server VM. This is a 4-host physical host system, so we can do that. And then we just go ahead and, accept the recommendation and go ahead and do it. And, and it will, as I said earlier on, move client sessions across, etc. It just does it all for us. I'm not going to do it because we're a little resource constrained and my colleagues wouldn't thank me, but that really is all there is to that. Very, very straightforward. And then if we look at the shares view, we get the same kind of metrics, down here, usage, performance. You can also manage quotas from here as well. You can see some of these shares are multi-protocol. So accessible over both, by both Linux and Windows clients. And what we can do, I mean, the process of deploying a share is incredibly simple. Again, just new share, and then support things like nested shares as well if you need that. Everything's thin provisioned by default, or you can stipulate a maximum size. That's fine. You have that control. If we want to go multi-protocol, great. We can specify that here. And then these are the kind of options. We would always recommend distributed because that's when you get the scale out goodness. Self-service store, compression. We can block file types, access-based enumeration, and encryption. All these options. So as I mentioned earlier, it's pretty feature-rich. And very straightforward to do. And that would just take a minute or two to deploy, not even, to be honest, to deploy under a minute to deploy a share. Now, file analytics can be accessed from this button down here, and that's what I'm going to do now, and that's what I'm going to spend the remainder of my part of the session showing you. So you can see here, you get a dashboard. You're instantly met with this dashboard view of what's going on within your environment. So most of these widgets, you'll see a kind of the ability to change the time range you're looking at. That's just, you see that virtually everywhere. And we can see how capacity has changed over time within the environment. And a lot of this stuff, by the way, is clickable and you can drill down, okay? And you can sort of drill into stuff there and then, which is useful. You can see also things like permission denials. Always very useful to know about that kind of stuff. But then just data demographics, really. So file distribution by size. So what kind of size of files are you storing? Top users, top most frequently accessed files, all this kind of stuff. And you can obviously build out the number of rows that you want to look at. There actually aren't that many active file servers because it's a demo environment. Or sorry, users, because it's a demo environment, but you get the idea. And I'll just build that one out a little bit more so you can see. Okay. And then over here on the right, we have different operations. So different types of things you can do to a file. So we can see things like permission denied, permission changed, and again we can look at over different time ranges. Everything really that you can do to a file is being audited here, basically, and recorded and graphed so that you can get an instant view or a feel for what's going on in the environment. Now, this is, I think this is a particularly useful one, the file distribution by type. So every organization has certain file types that are particularly, important to them. And we can see all the different types of files that are being stored in this particular environment, and they can be sorted here by by the count, by size, space used, all that good stuff. Okay, and if there's a file type that isn't included by default, and obviously that comes with a bunch predefined, then you can easily go in and define that new file type yourself. So it's just we add it in as a new file category. And I don't know, let's go for future music. When they invent MP5s, they probably won't. But hey, for the purposes of this, we just add that in there. And now we've got this future music MP5. And that's great. And now it's going to start reporting on and scanning and sort of watching for basically MP5 files being written. And yeah, so it tracks all of that, which is all very useful. We're going to come back to this anomaly alerts on the top right here. We'll come back to it a little bit later on, but that is a very interesting and useful feature. But next we'll look at auditing. So right here from the dashboard, I can see,
Steve, just keep an eye on the time. I think you might just need to mention it in the anomalies piece in the next minute or so, because we're going to have to wrap up soon.
Yep. Okay. No problem. Yep. So I'll just the sort of the killer features really. The auditing, very useful for organizations. You can choose a time range to zero in on that you're particularly interested for when this user did whatever operations. And then you can look at specifically filter by the types of operations that this user was undertaking. And then you can go down here and you can see all of the, all of the files, and you can see the path there pops up in the tooltip on the right. And you get a trail, and obviously even deleted files are being audited as well, and they're accessible here too, and you can again, increase that view. So that's useful. This hamburger menu will let you get to audit trails as well. And just to let you know that, we're not just tracking, the files, we're tracking folders and what's going on with those users, obviously, and actually client IP addresses as well. And this is very useful from a security standpoint to know, from which workstation particular activity is propagating from. Now, the anomalies, just very quick to, again, Franz, I will I'll make this brief. Anomaly is simply an event in the environment that you would like to know more about, or you would like to have flagged to your attention. So any of these types of events we can flag to your attention. So if there's lots of permission denied, as a percentage, or maybe a particular number of permission denied attempts across all users or individually within a time period, let's say 1 hour here, it will then, that's defined as an anomalous event, and it will flag that to our attention. And you can see here all these anomalies are being dashboarded, and we can drill down and find more about, which folders these anomalies are happening against, or which users are sort of, instigating these anomalous events. So very useful stuff. And then the ransomware, which is the most recent addition to file analytics. Again, very useful stuff in the modern age where, data centers all seem to be under attack these days. But we provide a list of signatures. That's basically file extensions synonymous with known ransomware attacks, and file name patterns as well, including wildcards. And we can see, straight away all of the attacks that have been blocked. Okay, and there are a whole bunch here. I've got a script running some nasty stuff, trying to write these nasty files, and we can see which particular shares are under attack. And in this case, it's my engineering repository. And we can see, again, we know we're tracking the IP addresses, and we can see the IP address from which the attack is occurring. What's very useful as well is that we can go in and check if there's a signature that we're not sure if we're protected against it. We can go and check for it. Is it in our database, our block list? Yes, it is. But if there's one that's maybe not been detected before, it's quite a new threat, we can check for that. And if that's not in our block list, we can add that in there and then. Okay, so we add that in, and you can see the block count goes up to 251. And then the final piece with the ransomware is the fact that, again, if you have snapshotting enabled on a share, that there's no way a malicious actor within the active file system can delete or corrupt a snapshot, because they're managed at a layer beneath the active file system. So, we certainly recommend enabling self-service restore on any shares that you haven't, and this is going to flag up any shares that you haven't got the snapshotting enabled on. So let's enable it on our share that's being attacked, and then we'll be able to restore, good clean copies of files that have been encrypted from out of the snapshot. Okay, I won't really talk about the reports. Suffice to say, the fact you can build reports, there are a bunch of pre-canned, or you can create your own custom reports, and then you can decide what types of content you want to put in those reports as well. So there's quite a lot you can add in. They can be quite information rich, very useful, and then they are in CSV or JSON formats. And then for my last trick, I'll show you the data age, because this is quite important for a new feature that we'll be bringing out later on this year. So again, we're tracking data age, and obviously it's all recently written data in this demo environment. So let's remove the hot data, because it's dominating the view. But we're tracking the data age, and you as a customer can define what you would consider to be hot, warm, and cold data. And what we're going to be doing going forward is allow you to automatically tier cold data from your files environment out to the cloud, or to an S3 object storage repository. So that's something that's going to be coming, and we've already kind of built the engine, if you like, or the capability to understand what data is cold and would need to be tiered out. So that's one to watch for later on this year. And that was it. So thanks for bearing with me, and apologies I've gone over a little bit, but hopefully that was useful.